Hi, I'm Brett Miller with the National Wood Flooring Association, here to talk today just a little bit about some tips on how to install wood floor up to a stone fireplace, a stone hearth. Scribing, we go through scribing techniques and how to add a nice custom element to any wood floor, being just a little simple border around a fireplace. So this is an example of the fireplace that we're going to be scribing our wood up to. Pre-manufactured stone, something we run into all the time on any normal construction job site. If you just try to butt this wood up tight to that floor, and hey, you've got a pretty good sized gap in between a lot of these boards and the stone, that caulking is not going to work. This is a feature to any living space. You want to highlight it with your wood floor if at all possible. So when you highlight this, you've got to do it properly. And the ways to do that include A, making sure that your floor is aligned with this header or this picture frame that you're going to put around this stone fireplace. And B, cut tight up to that stone so that it looks nice and natural and uniform, all while maintaining proper expansion space, taking into account the fact that your wood floor may swell and may create an issue if you don't take that expansion space into account. So to get started, one of the biggest keys that you've got to keep in mind is when you're putting a picture frame around this fireplace, whatever you do, it needs to align with your floor. Figure out where your floor is going to be square within the space. Take your measurements off of the walls, find a floor seam, measure off of opposing walls, and make sure that as you start to lay your floor out, you know that that floor is going to be aligned and straight within the space. This is a key focal point in the home. Walk right in, the first thing you see is this fireplace. The last thing you want to do is present your homeowner with something that shows a lot of flags or a lot of floorboards that don't align squarely with your floor or to the fireplace. So first things first, snap your lines. Doesn't matter where your first primary line is, but snap a primary line. In this case, what I did was I snapped a primary line right in the middle of this living room. This primary line represents what's square against the wall, what's square against the opposing walls, and where my floor is really going to be running in this space. So it gives me a reference point to install my wood floors squarely within the space. So what I'd like to do is set up a perpendicular line to my main line that actually gives me something to reference off of when I'm measuring and making sure that my picture frame is square to the floor. So I'm just going to run a random line, doesn't matter where it's at, but I'm going to run the similar line, perpendicular, all the way back to where now I can square this up, have something to measure off of so that this is now in line with that floor. Now what that does for us is it makes sure that I'm not trusting that this stone was installed square. I know that my floor needs to be square, and this is where the trick comes in. You've got to scribe this piece of wood to this stone, all while maintaining squareness within your wood floor. Now you'll notice the wood that I use, regardless of the width of the boards in my floor, I'm typically going to be using a wider plank board to ensure that I have enough. If I have to cut into this quite a bit, I know that I've got enough flooring material here to use here. Now I'll get into that in a little bit. I also want to make sure that the length of my board is long enough to where if I decide that I'm going to miter these corners, I've got enough material on both sides to miter the whole thing. So how do you know if the board should be sitting here or out here in relation to the squareness of your floor? Well, that's easy. You got to measure back to your primary line. One thing you'll notice, when you take a look at this material that you're scribing to and how uneven it actually is, you've got to make sure you know what the furthest point is that you're going to be cutting into your header board. Now to do that, now that I've squared this up to my floor, you'll notice this spot right here is actually the part that is as far out as this floor comes. So my point is, this is going to be the furthest cut into my board, whereas this stone that's right next to it leaves me about 3/4 of an inch here, where this wood is still going to need to exist as it goes in. So there's a couple tools you can use. One of them is just using a washer like this. This washer is real simple, something you pick up at the hardware store, but it allows you the ability to put a pin mark right on the inside of that washer, run the washer all the way along the surface that you're cutting, and real quickly it just gives you a little bit of a rough line to get started on. Another tool you can use where the washer doesn't allow your pin to drop in is a scribing tool. The scribing tool basically has a pencil, a point, and a place where you can adjust where that pencil is going to make its mark. One thing I like to do before I move this board out is make sure I know approximately where this board is supposed to be sitting. So I'm just going to roughly make a point here and make a point here, just so I know that that's going to be the outside of my picture frame. I also like to mark its point on the floor. Just gives me a reference point to where I know this board sits when I bring it back into place. So for the first cut, that's not bad. It got us a little bit closer. But again, as I'm going in here, I don't want to just drop it in here and say, ooh, that's nice and tight, because if you take a look, even measuring off of that line that I drew last time, I'm about 1/4 inch out of square. Biggest mistake I see guys make is just by making sure that their board is tight to the stone and not to the rest of the floor. So before I drop this in and make my more refined cuts up to this stone, I'm going to make sure that we're square to the rest of that floor. So now that my board's in place, this is where the real detail work comes in. You already know that you've taken off some material. I removed all of the tongue on that front side to make sure that my board sits as tight as I can get it. But I've still got quite a bit of gap here, about 3/8 of an inch of gap between this board and this stone back here. Some of this might be considered acceptable at the beginning point, but what I want to make sure I do is get this board as tight and seamless to this stone as I possibly can. Not a perfect situation. The stonemason set this stone up 3/4 of an inch, so you can slide your board right underneath and it makes for a seamless installation. But most of the time they don't. If I use this washer again and I run another line across here, I'll show you exactly what this does and how much material we may be taking off. What you know is I'm going to be taking off about 12 millimeters or about 1/2 inch of material just with the width of this washer. And I don't know that I need that, but let's just show you what that's going to do. The other thing with the washer that I don't like is that it's round going against a material that may not be, you're not getting all the details. Now if I cut this out, I'm going to get pretty dang close. However, where this washer came to this point here, it's already shooting out this direction from this stone, which means this cut is going to be way far off. Something else to keep in mind, this stone is not perfectly symmetrical going straight down. It's not perfectly linear going straight down. You may have undulations going back or coming out, and you'll notice that as you start dropping this board into place. Sometimes it helps to use your jigsaw as you're making this cut at a bit of a chamfer, a bit of an angle, to allow that board to really fit in case there is any point in this stone that actually shoots out on the outside and the underside. Using the washer gets you nice and a pretty straight line to cut in. And I can cut that and show you what it's going to look like. Something else I've used though, just take a scrap piece of wood. Using a scrap piece of wood, a couple things you want to keep in mind. A, you want to make sure that that scrap piece of wood has a nice sharp point on it that's not just going to break off. And it's something that is actually going to ride right along that stone at the floor level, coming all the way across. Now in order to do that, I've actually cut a little notch into that stone so I could put a pencil or a pin on it and make a pretty consistent line. Now it's not always the easiest to draw with, but it gives you consistency and it avoids that spot like I was talking about with the washer. So we're going to do another line. Notice on these two lines how the washer line, which is the outermost line, is running nice and even. It's a nice straight line going all the way across. Well, again, think about this point when we talk about this. The scribe line, just using a scrap piece of wood like I was showing, is actually tighter inside, and it followed the contours of that stone in much more detail. Now you'll notice I didn't have any material here to rub my piece against, which means this board's going to drop in even further. But here is where I really wanted to point out the difference. Again, cutting this board at a 90-degree angle coming in, I would have potentially had 3/8 of an inch difference here from running that washer that came back out here in comparison to what I did with that piece of wood right here, in the hopes of this wood actually wrapping inside here a little bit closer than would have been here. So now I want to show you the end result, a board that we cut, put into place, and what we can do with it as we're getting ready to assemble this whole piece. So as this board is cut into place, normally you can make this as tight as you want. This is normally a caulkable line. Keep in mind, as you're installing or scribing any board to stone, or anything that's abnormal, or anything that's a fixed fixture on this wood floor, again, keep in mind you've got to account for potential expansion space. If the space the floor is going into is not capable of maintaining a consistent temperature and humidity, this floor is going to possibly swell or shrink. And no expansion space may cause this to become the pivot point, causing this floor to buckle after it's been installed. So without proper expansion, either installed into the floor or even leaving this off consistently and caulked with a nice matching caulk, silicone caulk, something that's flexible, or what a lot of guys will do is install this tight and install a piece of cork or something that's flexible in the floor system as a part of the decorative feature to still allow for that possible expansion. So now that we've got this board cut into place and we know that we're square within the entire floor system, we're going to start working on the legs. I've tightened up this leg. I know that we're square with our line. We're about as tight as I need to be. I want to make sure that everything lines up the way it's supposed to. So now you can see that I have a header board here that's square with the floor, a header board here that's square with the floor, and a nice picture frame going all the way around. So another thing you can do to decorate this up is put in some nice feature strip using some curly maple. You can always throw in some different types of species also if you wanted to throw just a nice outer border of walnut around that. You can see how nice that can look as a feature strip around a fireplace, and the rest of your floor is going to be installed tight to this. These are all very simple custom features that you can add to any job site wood floor installation. If you have a stone fireplace, typically that's the center feature point, a focal point of any job. And if you can sell the customer on customizing that and making them really showcase the fact that they have a beautiful fireplace and you can do something with your wood floor to highlight that fireplace, a lot of times it's an easy upsell.